Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Filmmakers at Google night in Santa Monica. I'm Julie Wiskirchen, and I'm here to introduce Chris Mason Johnson. Chris began his career as a dancer, and he once danced with Mikhail Baryshnikov. He got a film degree from Amherst College and worked as the head of development at Open City Films and a script editor for several studios. And he co-wrote, produced, and directed his first feature, The New 20, which will be screening tonight. And now Chris will tell us a little bit about the movie, and please join me in welcoming Chris.
Hello, everybody. Eating Korean barbecue at the Google office in Santa Monica. All right, so this is an independent feature film that, as Julie said, I directed and co-wrote and produced. It's genuinely independent. I raised the money myself from private equity and edited it on a laptop with Final Cut. So if you have questions about all that angle on it, we can talk after the screening. But for a brief intro, what I'd like to just tell you is how this story began, actually, the film. It started in New York when my good friend Ishmael came over and told me about a bachelor party that he'd been to a few nights before. It was a bachelor party for a mutual friend, and it was one of those parties that got pretty extreme. They had hired a couple strippers, they had a hotel room in a very swank hotel, and I was not invited, even though we were all really good friends. And the reason I wasn't invited is because I am not completely heterosexual. And they are. So there were sort of these lines drawn. That is, we were a group of friends, a group of buddies, right? We went to college together. Some straight, some gay. We hung out together. There weren't the usual divisions that you know from the stereotypical films or TV shows that deal with those issues, right? It wasn't like, here's the segregated gay show, and here's all the buddies bonding. It was a mix. But when it came to the bachelor party, I wasn't invited. So clearly, even though we're dealing with the new male here, for whom these old divisions are not as strict, there are still some divisions. Anyway, so the party got very extreme and almost sort of, you know, Carlos Castaneda-like in its mushroom-enhanced bacchanalia. And I was just fascinated by this, you know, by the idea of this group of guys hanging out together in this very erotic way, something that simply could not have happened even 20 years ago because there was just too much tension around sensuality between straight male friends. You just couldn't do it. So I thought, all right, this is some kind of evolution here. At the same time, there are still these lines drawn, again, because I wasn't invited. So he told me the story of this party, and I said, that sounds like a pretty good screenplay idea. And he said, well, why don't we write it? And I said, okay. And we were both just ready for that in our life at the moment, so we embarked on this project that became a years-long project. So the bachelor party in the movie is not anything like what happened in real life. So fiction evolves, so you won't see anything of what I just described exactly. So again, what I was interested in was depicting this like a group of buddies who were not all straight. And when you see buddy movies, they're all straight. Now in the Judd Apatow movies, a lot of the jokes are around homosexual panic. I think the whole premise is built around that. You know, I love you, man. The whole thing is built around that. But nevertheless, they're all straight. So I simply hadn't seen it before. And the only place I'd seen a mix is in the family dramas, you know, 6 Feet Under, Brothers and Sisters, or if there's a mix of guys and girls and it's sort of a pseudo-family like Reality Bites, there'll be the one gay subplot, right? So I simply hadn't seen this mix, and I was interested in it because it was something that I think is happening in life. We're sort of, is this the post-gay generation, right? Obviously not, but in some sense, yes. So we're seeing it play out now with marriage equality, right? The younger you are, the more likely you are to be pro-marriage equality. So we're in this evolutionary moment where these things are just not a big deal. People would rather not talk about him. Yeah, he's gay, so what? Get over it. It's not a big deal, right? But at the same time, there are still these divisions. So that's represented in the movie in a couple ways. Tension between the guys who are buddies and who are over it, but for whom there are still tensions that often play out in humor. And then tensions between an older generation who might be more explicitly homophobic and the younger generation of guys. So that was the original inspiration. And the other thing I'd like to say before we start the film is I didn't think that I had written and directed a gay film. It was just an ensemble drama about a group of people. And I didn't want to ghettoize it as a gay film because I felt the sort of moment of great queer film had maybe passed. We'd had a burst of it, and then there'd been some films a little bit later. And I thought we were in like a phase of these kind of pandering movies with like a shirtless hunk and sort of softcore, and I didn't even want to see them, and I didn't really want to be associated with them. That was sort of my prejudice. But someone sent a screener to festival programmers at Outfest, and they called us and they invited us. That's a big gay and lesbian festival in Los Angeles every summer. And we debated it long and hard, should we ghettoize ourselves, et cetera. And some people advised us against it in very strong terms. And they were very wrong. We did it, and it was the best thing we could have done because, well, here I have, this is what our poster was initially, which I think was on your flyer. It's a group of faces, the cast, and it says 30 is what it used to be. And then, this is what we became, which is a very different demographic that's being targeted there. So, you're a tiny independent movie. We recently had a theatrical in New York and LA, iTunes July 1st. But you don't have a lot of marketing money. And what the Gay Festival did for us was it gave us an actual market we could target. And as it turns out, that market was really hungry for smarter content that wasn't pandering, that wasn't the latest Uncle Tom version of gay film, right? That actually reflected something from life. So that was a wonderfully positive thing. The irony, though, is that some of our most receptive audiences have been women. We have a couple here tonight. Because it is a relationship film, and women have just responded really strongly to it, and straight young men. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. It gave us a market that, as a tiny independent film, we could target, and that helped us financially. In New York, we were in the top 5 for indie box office per screen average at the Quad opening weekend. The other side of that double-edged sword is I do regret that I haven't been able to reach a wider audience who really do respond to this film, because in that other sense, it's not a gay film. So, if you like it, tell your friends. iTunes, July 1st. On demand, July 1st, nationwide in Canada. And without further ado, enjoy the film. Thank you.